Sound check.
God, you've been quite the DJ for the last couple weeks. That's my routine. What? You've been quite the DJ for the last couple weeks.
I find out what everybody else is
You were the DJ out on the flatbed a couple weeks ago. Whose phone is going off here? Somebody's disconnected. It's right next to him. It doesn't hear. I can't complain, you? All right. Oh, Ryan's speaking.
Miguel. Orlando Miguel. Norm Stein. I had a funeral. Came in 5 o'clock in the morning. And they were going to let me go at 11. To get to this funeral by 1 o'clock.
Were you out running around with the demonstrators?
And I called the desk.
No, sir. That was Mark Wilson, Captain Mark Wilson of the Light Photo Brigade.
Yeah, send the old guy.
Hey, you guys. Spry as a spring chicken.
Spry. But tell me this.
We haven't heard back from that.
Hey, you know what? He shot stills and video.
So you hear
He was kicking it in the 21st century.
y'all
What
big
can I say?
Miguel Stein? Miguel, KB 508. KB 508. KB 508. KB 508. It's now 11:15. I'm like, I have got to go. I can't let you go until I have a replacement for you. This is all on the radio. Coming up 14th Street. We'll be close next to it. But Orlando, with the radio, they're looking at the radio and talking to each other. I can pull up the red light out of my car. And I go on the radio and say, yeah, you've got to be
He's from the same area.
Yeah, I can't make that.
Bill, I'm looking
He's
at
from the same area.
I'm looking at Orlando and I'm looking at Norm. We're at 14th and L. They won't answer their radio. I'm going home. I'm leaving. You got these two guys. They're refusing to answer their radio. They drove just like those radios are great, man. Those radios are great. And then the conversation goes, get to a landline. Right. Get to a landline. Yeah. Right. So he told them, so they get to this landline. I don't know what happened after that. But
They were using anti-flicker.
I haven't heard that much fire over radio in a long time.
Hmm?
He went,
They were using the anti-flicker function.
off.
It helps.
He went
Yeah.
off.
It'll lag your shutter.
Yeah, it's what I'm finding.
It makes the decision.
Yeah.
There they are.
Hey, buddy. Hi, Michael. Wait a minute.
Michael.
Shook. How you doing, sir?
That's a long
Love boat.
Hey, Chip, you know we're neighbors since I moved?
You're in Silver Spring, aren't you?
No, I'm in a mile and a half south of Leon Park.
Oh.
Yeah, this is kind of.
Where are you now?
The Manor
Hey,
Park.
I'm covering
Manor
this.
Park.
Where
Where's
is
Manor
Manor
Park?
About a mile south of there.
Okay.
Do you know the Tacoma Natural Foods or whatever?
Yeah.
I just went there for the first time.
Did you become a member?
I didn't. I can't get my wife on board. She thinks it's expensive, but it's the same price as mom's.
It's amazing how the cell
Oh
phone
yeah, certainly.
changed
It's probably even
everything.
less expensive than mom's if you have a membership.
Yeah, but anyway, it's about a mile and a half south of that.
Yeah, I'm looking at Manor Park on my map right now.
You see the park sloping?
Yeah.
I know.
Fort
It's,
Slocum?
Yeah, it's my house is
this
right
way.
around the corner of
I think it's
Kansas.
Hispanic.
So I'm facing that park there.
I think.
And then I have that park on the left.
Oh,
And that's
lovely.
my house right there. Right there.
Lovely. What a great lot. Nice
It is,
corner
yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Yes, go back.
Oh, that's
I was
awesome.
down
I
in
didn't know that's
Kansas,
where you
so
had
it's nice
moved.
quiet, yeah.
That's great. So you.
Has been great. It's been a little, the community's been a little bit, I have to be honest, a little disappointed.
Why do you say that?
It's not like I'm.
Michael would never say that. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I'm never saying that. That's true. But
Oh, yeah.
I just
Yeah.
call down
Oh,
the
I should read
line.
you guys.
That's
You want a calendar?
Alexandria had crime.
The question is, did they answer?
Oh, you're right over by Three Stars. Nice.
What's that?
Three Stars Brewing Company. On the weekends, you can go to the parking lot there, line up, and you can buy microbrew, some of the best microbrew in DC.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Lincoln Cottage. Yeah, it's north of Lincoln Cottage. That's right. I literally drive right by your house every day on the way home from work.
Okay, so that park right across the street. This is why I'm a little bit disheartened.
Why? Because you found bodies over there.
Well, practically, at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, I look out the window, and there are 3 vehicles driving between 40 and 50 miles an hour
Through the park.
doing donuts through the park,
You know,
destroying
you have,
the grass.
you have very exciting neighbors, but like, you are right by the community gardens. These are the community gardens. You can apply for and get a plot over here and grow your own food and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's totally cool. And you're right by the Humane Research or
Yeah, I
Humane
know that. I'm
Society.
very close to that.
And then also back over here is DC Dynasty.
They were stolen cars.
Of course they were.
Going for a joyride.
What day was it? Monday?
Monday morning,
Yeah.
7 a.m. Just
They probably hadn't been home yet.
Oh, yeah, the park was just destroyed. I mean, it's devastating, the grass. And also, they get their flowers. I don't blame them because, they took off pretty quick. But they show up and the first thing they say is,
Oh,
it's National Dog Media.
we got nothing to do with this.
Yeah, so,
So
okay.
we're driving away. Don't
Yeah,
need the
exactly.
paperwork. So you're very close. You could just bicycle downtown Tacoma. So Tacoma Station.
Tacoma's awesome. I had
Tacoma
no
Station.
idea.
They're working on doing a whole redevelopment plan over there. It's going to be very nice.
But I love my house. It's a dream house, just come true. I've never. If I can't understand your reason. Walls that I'm
Oh,
not
the
sharing.
Tacoma Aquatic Center. Yeah, you're in a good spot. Really lovely.
And you know what, dude? It's awesome.
Your son is gonna love. Oh yeah, your son is gonna love the Tacoma Community Center with the water park, the indoor water park.
Really?
It's quite cool.
Is it open now? Is it
Probably
open
over
this
to the
summer?
winter, yeah.
Tacoma.
It's the Tacoma Aquatic Center.
Okay, check it out.
Yeah, a bunch of stuff. Great.
Is that for Maryland residents only?
No, it's in the district.
What's up, baby?
In the district.
Did you like my response? I had no idea Tacoma Park was so nice, but it's really nice.
Don't go around telling people that.
It is.
Don't go around telling people that. We don't need any more people up there.
Enough.
Enough. Traffic.
Yes, absolutely.
In the 8 years we've been there, traffic has tripled.
Really, I believe it. It's a gem.
It is a gem. We love it. We absolutely, positively love it. We wouldn't live anywhere else. Wouldn't live anywhere else. Love it.
So how did the way that the southern law leaders really hurt the city by prohibiting a lot of blacks from getting homes? They did some things that made it very not integrated. So the city is not integrated. That's my impression, is that it's super fucking segregated.
Like I say, you don't have to think about it's white privilege.
Everybody wants to be in the Northwest and nowhere else.
Well, that also started a long time ago before air conditioning. It was cooler up there. It was more elevated.
Really?
That's why Lincoln's Cottage is up there.
I'm
Up
definitely
and away from the
elevated.
water.
I'm elevated. I can see the National Cathedral on the horizon. It's exciting, dude. I mean, I love it. Like, I'm used to living in a row house, It's just a huge
You used to
upgrade.
live in Virginia too.
That's true. Exactly.
You're in the district, aren't you? Or you?
No, he's from McLean.
Oh, well, that's not close. That's much less.
McLean's pretty Virginia, actually.
Stop it.
It's lovely.
Stop it.
It's lovely.
I just spoke to him.
Oh, yeah. Put it this way. My daughter was just,
But you know where HBC
at the time,
studio is?
we were traveling
The locker room.
someplace way out of state, and she'd never seen a billboard before. I wrote, "Ooh, Daddy, those are so ugly."
Yes, they are, dear. Yes, they are. They are.
Quite the upbringing, dude. We have to talk about that. That's
You've
amazing.
not put much fun in your old digs lately.
When my
You
children
don't have
were
very much fun in your old digs lately.
Yeah, it's been kind of So when I turn on NFL,
Oh, you gotta get something to do.
Netflix,
Oh, yeah, 'cause they
Amazon,
media,
they just-
watching
they-
media.
yeah, they don't watch.
They're doing all this stuff.
And so, whenever I'm watching NFL on Sunday afternoon, they only want me to call into the room for the commercial. I don't really need.
There's a funny story about my older brother. He
That's very thoughtful of you to do it that way. I gotta tell you, there's so many things commercials.
So it was Amanda.
We don't even think about it because we just turn them off in our head, but then when you have a teenage daughter and you're sitting around the sofa watching something together, next thing you know, Viagra commercial comes on.
Yeah.
She knows what it is.
Yeah, there's something
And
that's.
the commercials is like
Dude, even this, like, not like YouTube, like, we use YouTube. And these commercials will pop up on YouTube now that are not child friendly.
No.
Like, even when you're watching a cartoon, and it's like, dude, like, this is advertising of organs.
Yeah.
And my kid's watching a
My
cartoon.
daughter saw a commercial for a horror movie on one day during, I think it was World Series.
Walking through.
Boy, that
Oh, yeah.
struck her. Struck her.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on
Yeah.
either a commercial or a
I wondered if that was gonna
segment
happen.
of
Well, it wasn't like,
a
it was a lot.
television program that they made for TV movie about
At the very least, last time around.
Native Americans, and there was a scalping scene. And I was like 8 years old, dude, that scared the shit out of me.
You're still talking about that.
Yeah, I still remember it to this fucking day. I mean, I was like crying. I was inconsolable for about 2 hours.
Right.
Do you remember that?
I'm at the end of my career.
I remember the beginning of public service commercials.
My league.
Because there was this famous public service announcement showing people throw litter out of their cars and everything.
Yeah.
With a tear.
Yeah, he's sitting on horseback by the side of the road.
Yeah.
Hands up to his eye, he's got a tear rolling down his eye. That's a famous one. That Hootsy the Owl, remember Don't Pollute? Never being dirty bird. In the city and in the woods, we'll keep America.
What would sing? What would sing?
Shoot Hootie the Owl stuff and put him in his office.
Themselves. What's the name of the bear at the fire?
Smokey.
Bolt.
Let's see this,
I remember.
That makes sense. I'm not sure.
And then they're like, where are the knees at?
That was an interesting 24 hours on that.
I ran so much people.
I'll never forget standing in that back wave for hours.
Running.
We're gonna come back.
Here we go. Keep America beautiful, Scott. Here.
Oh, no, I thought that was Thursday Adams. It's a white
Something coding. He was a real famous. William Conrad, the announcer.
Somebody said 3. It's actually a good commercial.
Yeah,
man.
this is a very good commercial. 1971, it's not too shabby.
Yeah, they were very serious.
He has strong activism in the 1971. Much more so than Thomas. The lefties were active.
That's right, they were paid by communists.
Well, I'm for the lefties.
Thompson Wheeler Fortune.
But
Basically, so we can battle this chair.
heads up.
Did you get the medal, sir?
Yes, good.
Good afternoon, everyone. Every parent should be able to trust that when they drop their kids off at school, it's going to be a safe place for their kids to learn, to make friends, and to find their purpose. That trust was broken at Parkland, Florida, at Freeman High School in Eastern Washington, in the communities of Columbine, Sandy Hook, and too many others. When that trust is broken, communities are left broken too. It's in these moments that we have to take a collective step back and ask the question, why? What is exactly going on in the community that they have to face the horror of a community school shooting? In my community, it meant that we came together, school superintendents, principals, law enforcement officers, and we asked that question, why? What's causing young people to feel so lost or alone? And worse, what's leading them to choose violence? These questions do not have clear answers, but as we keep having the courageous conversations with one another, I'm hopeful that we'll have more ideas like Sheriff John Rutherford's idea on the Stop School Violence Act. These are the kind of ideas that help our local communities prevent, recognize, and respond when there are warning signs of violence. And I am pleased to yield to the author of the legislation, Sheriff Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I first want to thank all the leadership that is here, Whip Scalise and Leader McCarthy and our conference chair, who have been amazing supporters of this bill, helping to move it forward. The action that the House just took, I think, is an important first step forward in protecting our children, our teachers, and other administrators within our schools, because it is going to not only harden the target through technology, but most importantly, I believe, it's actually going to provide the tools and education needed by those in our schools to recognize these individuals who have a propensity to become active shooters. As sheriff back in Duval County, I always told my community and my officers that I did not want to be the best first responder to an active shooter event. We must prevent it before it occurs. And so that's what this bill does. That's the goal of this bill, is to provide prevention within our schools. And so, again, I want to thank all of my colleagues who really made this bill stronger, and through some of the changes that we initiated through the process, and say thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Goodlatte, Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. One of our highest priorities as legislators is to protect those who are vulnerable, especially children. When students go to school fearing for their safety, we need to take action to protect them from harm. I applaud the passage of the Stop School Violence Act, which takes a multifaceted approach to the epidemic of school violence that has shocked the nation. This bill empowers students, teachers, and law enforcement and trains them how to recognize and respond to warning signs. With increased training, technology, and coordination with law enforcement, we can be better prepared to defend students from violence and respond quickly and effectively to threats as they arise. No student should ever have to go to school in fear. We will continue to listen to students, teachers, and administrators to examine the issue of school safety and improve the classroom environment for our nation's children. This bill is a great first step, and I thank my colleagues, Representatives Rutherford, Shabbat, Granger, Davis, Messer, Bost, Kaufman, Brooks, and many others for their collaboration on this important bill.
At a time when people are asking Washington to do something, Congress actually took action today to not just do something, but to start addressing the problem with a strong bill, the Stop School Violence Act, that gives students, teachers, and law enforcement more tools to actively identify a potential shooter before a tragedy happens. What we saw in Parkland was an example of so many breakdowns in government, at the federal level with the FBI, at the local level with local law enforcement. When so many students knew this was going to happen, I think the thing that irritates people the most is that something wasn't done to stop it before it did happen. And we need to focus on stopping those tragedies before they happen. As Sheriff Rutherford said, I want to commend Sheriff Rutherford for his leadership to put a coalition together that was incredibly bipartisan. What you saw today was a 407-10 vote to specifically start addressing the problem to stop school violence. And I think that overwhelming bipartisan vote shows how serious this bill is, and clearly there are more things that need to be done, but this is one of those things that actually gets to the heart of addressing the problem to stop school violence before a tragedy happens.
It was 1 month ago today, and we were reminded of that today by the hundreds of thousands of students that walked out of classes today. We all stand here believing and working to try to ensure that these schools can be safe, and we need to make sure our schools are safe. We hear these students, we hear the families, we are listening. This bill is one important step. It's not the first step we've ever taken. I'm in my 6th year in Congress. In the 21st Century Cures Act, we actually voted to ensure that there are school intervention teams and more funding for school resources for mental health. This won't be the last step that we will take as a Congress. It is important. And we are listening. We're listening to the kids. We're listening to their families. We're listening to law enforcement like Sheriff Rutherford, who have devoted his life. He's devoted his life to protecting and serving our communities, just like other law enforcement officers. But what I read in my paper this morning was a new movement called Walk Up, Not Just Out. And what Walk Up is about, it's about students walking up to those other students in school who might be alone. It's about students walking up and talking and sharing, becoming friends with people who have no friends. It is about all of us as a community recognizing that we do have troubled people and troubled students in our midst. On the night of the shooting, one of my school districts responded to over 100 anonymous reports that came into that school district that night. Teachers worked throughout the night to try to make sure, working with law enforcement, that their school was going to be safe the next day, and it was. This bill focuses also on improving and increasing the number of anonymous reporting systems that are out there. It's just one thing among many other good things that are in this bill. I want to applaud Sheriff Rutherford and our colleague Representative Deutsch for introducing this bill 1 week before Parkland happened. We will not forget, we are taking a critical step, and we are listening to the students and their families.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Hoffman from the 6th District of Colorado, which includes the city of Aurora, Brighton, Centennial, where Arapahoe High School is located, Highlands Ranch, and portions of Littleton, which is near Columbine High School. I represent families that know all too well the impact violence has on our communities. So as we gather here today, we do so in the name of parents, students, and teachers across our nation who, like us, are concerned about school safety and are committed to finding common sense solutions. No parent should ever have to wonder if their child is safe at school. This bill seeks to provide the funding necessary to improve school security, both physical and technological, reaffirm continued coordination with law enforcement agencies, and improve communication channels between students and school officials. In my home state, such programs as the Safe to Tell initiative have already proven positive in helping those in need, and I look forward to further exploring similar initiatives made possible in this bill. I want Coloradans and Americans across the country to know that Congress is taking action to stop school violence, and I commend my colleagues here for helping get this bill across the finish line. As someone who has been working on this issue for some time, I challenge my colleagues, as well as students, parents, and teachers, to keep the national conversation going. When we all stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, there is nothing we as a people or as a nation can't accomplish. Thank you.
I'm Steve Shabbat, Cincinnati 1st District of Ohio. Our nation's schools have too often become soft targets for any would-be killer with a gun. And we've got to do a better job protecting our children. And this legislation that we just walked off the floor and just passed today is a big step in that direction. By reauthorizing the COP Secure Our Schools grant program for the next 10 years and more than doubling the funding available for the program, we're helping to give schools and local law enforcement the tools they need to make our schools safer and more secure. Security measures eligible for funding include metal detectors, improvements in identifying and treating mental health issues, and security training for school personnel and students. I'd also like to note that Attorney General Sessions just announced that the Justice Department will use the COPS hiring program to increase the number of school resource officers nationwide. That announcement, coupled with the legislation that we just passed today, will go a long way towards making sure that our schools have both the security measures and personnel in place to prevent future violence. And I'd also like to thank Leader McCarthy, Chairman Goodlatte, Congressman Rutherford, and many others for their leadership on this issue. And I'd especially like to recognize and thank the President of Cincinnati FOP, Dan Hills, for sharing his common sense proposal to improve school safety. Thank you very much.
What we just witnessed on the House floor was a result of hard work of many members. This wasn't something that just was started a month ago. This was started back in October. Bipartisan, with Sandy Hook promise as well. I do want to thank former Sheriff of Jacksonville, Representative Rutherford. And I want you to understand what Stop School Violence stands for. STOP is an acronym for Students, Teachers, Officers Prevention Act. You see, we worked with everybody in producing this bill, and that was the right way to go about it. That's why on this floor you saw a vote of 407 members voting yes. You don't always see that every day on the floor. But I also want to give a little shout out to those members that have been such a big part of this bill and other legislation as well. First of all, you just heard from Chairman Shabbat, Susan Davis, Boss, Kay Granger, Luke Messer, and of course, Mr. Kaufman. Their work putting into this bill and others is of great importance. Because what this bill will do is provides the grants for evidence-based training to prevent school violence. But that's not the only thing this Congress is doing. This Congress has a bill sitting over in the Senate dealing with the National Instant Criminal Background Check that we found that had failed in a shooting in Texas not that long ago. But it wasn't, the failure was on the military. We want to make sure we close that hole as well. And then if you saw also, when we had Chairman Goodlatte up here, he's already had hearings when it came to the FBI. 1 month ago, we were all in shock. We're also upset. And what we even made it worse was when we found that the FBI had been warned twice, 5 months prior, that this could have been prevented. The legislation today, we hope, prevents from this ever happening again, that any more would ever happen across the United States. So I do want to thank the sheriff for continuing to do his work to protect those and including everybody in the process. With that, I thank you. I don't think we have any questions.
I have questions.
Okay.
What is your message to the students who are rallying right now outside on the Capitol lawn, demanding tougher gun laws and saying school safety is not enough?
Well, if you watch what we have produced on this floor, it's not just school safety. As I talked to before, the National Instant Criminal Background Check, making sure we're preventing those that should not have a weapon to be able to make sure we stop that. But even more important, the hearings that are coming forward. The FBI has already had one, and Judiciary has another one coming forward, because 5 months prior, we found this Nicholas Cruz went onto YouTube and said he wants to be a professional school shooter. An individual called the tip line in West Virginia for the FBI. They initiated a check into it. They never called YouTube, and they closed the case.
But that wasn't the only red flag. A few months later, a family member called, warning the way he has treated animals, a recent death, and what he's been dealing when it comes to weapons. The FBI opened a new investigation, having also noticed that they were notified a short time before. They actually closed that case again. So we want to make sure, one, that we close from a background check, from a NIC, fix that, because when you looked what happened in Texas, it was the military. There's no reason Kelly ever should have had a weapon. 2 instances of why he was supposed to be prevented. 1, being dishonorably discharged, and 2, the abuse of his spouse. But that was a failure. Now, we want to make sure we gather all the information. But as Chairwoman Susan Brooks mentioned as well, in our legislation that we passed for cures, dealing with the mental illness. So this won't be the only part of legislation we do, but we will continue to work to make sure we solve the problem going forward. We make sure we also have all the information.
Would you be willing to put fixed NICS as a standalone bill on the House floor?
Well, the one thing I will tell you, we have more than 400 bills sitting over in the Senate. That bill is sitting in the Senate right now. This will be an addition to it. I would hope that the Senate would act soon, send us legislation, just as we have sent them, and let's get something to the President's desk to sign, because I know the President is wanting one as well. Thank you all very much.